We all think a new house means a fresh start, new paint, new keys, a chance to bury all the little messes from the last place. What you don't expect is that the things that settle into a new home aren't always cobwebs or dust. Sometimes it's someone else already living in the silence. Sometimes it's someone watching the rooms you sleep in. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 true stories about new homes that turned into nightmares. 3 accounts from people who moved into what felt like a clean slate and discovered they'd stepped into someone else's secrecy. These aren't supernatural tales. They're about people, privacy broken, and the small details that tipped everything over into fear. If you love true scary stories, hit like and subscribe. 1 click helps us tell more. Story 1. The Neighbor Imposter. Montreal. We closed on the house in late fall. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke, and the realtor kept saying what a steal it had been. My partner and I were exhausted and elated. It was a bigger place than we were used to. 2 floors, a long backyard, an old maple that scraped the roof when the wind picked up. The previous owners had sold to a young Polish couple who promised to be friendly neighbors. For the first week, everything fit the picture. Boxes stacked in legal piles, coffee mugs left in the sink, the polite wave between porches. Then the noise started. At first it was nothing we would call suspicious. A muffled bass line late at night, someone practicing, someone's stereo turned up too loud. Once, at 3 in the morning, there was a banging that made the house shiver. We thought someone had dropped something heavy in the alley. I remember standing at our kitchen window, cupping my hands against the cold glass, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Soon, the noises graduated. A knock at the front door in the middle of the night, a package ripped open and tossed across our driveway. Our car arrived the next morning with a dent in the bumper. Superficial, but someone had keyed the word "leave" into the paint, faint and cruel. My partner wanted to call the police right away. I hesitated. I tried to tell myself it was stress. Moving will do that, right? People are jerks sometimes. We had doorbell footage. We'd installed a cheap camera as part of the move, one of those little boxes with grainy night vision that shows a greenish square with timestamp numbers. On a rainy Tuesday at 2:13 a.m., the feed showed a man at our porch. He looked like he was trying to get in. He knocked, stayed for a moment, and then walked away. A minute later, 2 men appeared in the frame, moving with a purpose, ripping the lock off the side gate. The footage is jerky. You can see the rain streaking like quick white lines across the glass. One of them paused and looked up at the camera. He was wearing a jacket that could have been any jacket. He knocked again. Then both men left. We filed a report. Officers came by, took our statements, and the usual questions followed: names, addresses, times. A police sergeant told us to stay vigilant. He asked if we knew any of the neighbors. We said yes, the couple next door. He nodded, scribbled something down, and handed us a card. Days later, the house next door was a mess of arguments and shouting. We could hear raised voices through the walls, even across the yard. The next thing that happened felt like a bad dream. A different group of people came to the door, a man and a woman late at night, claiming they were the ones who had just moved in. They were upset, they said, because our neighbor couple had vanished. They were frantic and then hungry for sympathy. They told a story I can't forget, that they had been robbed and someone had impersonated them. They wanted help, and they wanted the bad people gone. I watched the doorbell footage again and again. A detective from Montreal police set up a meeting and asked to look at the files. The grainy images were enhanced, and still the faces were blurred by rain and cheap optics. But something felt off in the way these new claimants interacted. They were too smooth, too practiced. My partner and I compared notes on the timing of their arrival. They matched up to the gaps in the footage where men moved through frames, as if they knew the route. Then the car chase happened. We heard it first as a thundering down our quiet street, sirens and tires, a vehicle screaming past at a speed too fast for residential roads. Police lights flared, throwing color against the brick, A few houses over, officers detained people. When the dust settled, authorities handcuffed 2 men. The media came for a day, the neighborhood offering up its curiosity in whispers. The police told us the men had been intercepted a few blocks away, trying to break into another property. After the arrests, there was a collision of versions. The men in cuffs insisted they were the rightful owners of the house next door. They had ID with names that matched nothing in our records. They spoke in carefully arranged stories about being displaced, about renters who had sold their belongings. The police held them for questioning. Then, late one evening, a figure arrived at our doorstep, someone who did not look like the smooth imposters, and certainly not like the people who'd been arrested. This was a person who looked like they'd been through something violent. They were covered in blood. They would not speak to the officers at first. They refused to cooperate. They told the officers nothing. They refused help. I remember looking from the collapsed figure to the news vans and feeling a sliding scale of disbelief and dread. Someone had been hurt. Someone was hiding who they were, and our neighbor was no longer a stable presence. A neighbor, an older woman across the way who spoke Polish, said later that she recognized that wounded person. She whispered translations and gestures about the couple who had lived there before, and about people she had seen around at odd hours. But what she could tell us was incomplete. She told us that she'd seen strangers coming and going. At trial, if you can call what happened an organized trial, there were holes. The arrested men's motives were unclear. They were charged with attempted break-ins and impersonation, according to the report, but it didn't stitch together the tidy narrative we wanted. Our real neighbor, the one who showed up injured, refused to press charges or provide full statements. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was protecting someone. Maybe he was afraid. The police said they had enough to make arrests. They said they had leads. They said they were doing what they could. The rest was indefinido. We moved our bedroom to the back of the house. We taped the expensive grainy camera in a higher position, tried to sleep with lamps on low, and laughed too loudly at home to convince ourselves there was nothing to be afraid of. The dent in our car remained. The maple tree still scraped the roof on windy nights just the same. The couple who had sold to us never showed up again, and the neighborhood whispered. In the weeks after, the sense of safety in that house felt like paper, thin and easily torn. We knew the police had done work, but the outcome was not neat. People had been arrested. A wounded man had arrived at our doorstep. A wife had left town. Names shifted like smoke in the air, and some questions were left without answers. We kept the footage on a sealed drive. Sometimes, when we argued about small things, one of us would mention the knock in the night, or the night our car was keyed. Small domestic arguments would quiet into a mutual remembering of that feeling of being watched and unsettled in a place that was supposed to be our refuge. If you felt that twinge of unease hearing that, wait, Story 2 will make you start checking the outside of your windows at night. Story 2. The Watcher at the Window. Indefinido location. I was 15. I was 15 when we moved into the split-level house. It had a short flight up to the bedrooms, a living room window that looked out over the street, and a mirrored closet door that made my room feel twice as big when the afternoon light hit it. The house had a cheap charm, peeling wallpaper in places, the smell of the previous tenant still in the carpet, water stains on the ceiling that promised repairs in the spring. To me, it was freedom. New room, new school, new friends. I was supposed to feel born again into adolescence. At first the oddities were tiny and easy to rationalize. I'd hear a soft shuffling at night, like someone in slippers on a wooden floor. Once I woke up convinced I had heard breathing at the window. I told myself it was the HVAC kicking in, or a raccoon. My dad told me it was probably branches. My mom joked that maybe the house was just settling. When you're young, everyone assumes the invisible is childish. You might be unsurprised to hear I didn't push it when they told me to shrug it off. The mirrored closet worked against me. I would wake at 2 in the morning and see a faint shape reflected in the silver glass that I could not explain. It would be a dark smudge near the bottom of the mirror that vanished if I sat up. Sometimes the blinds wouldn't be fully closed, though I was sure I shut them. Once I taped the slats shut. The next morning the tape was loose. I had a routine: study, shower, a late-night snack, then lights out. At some point I started falling asleep with the television on at low volume so I could hear something familiar in case the night felt too silent. My parents would laugh about that later, as if sleep habits could excuse the rest. But I remember the sound of the house as a living thing, the creaks and the sighs, and the way every small noise became a person if you let it. One winter night, a storm rolled through. The wind came in thick and loud. It moved the trees so hard that branches scratched the siding like fingernails. I lay awake and watched the window because storms make weird things possible. There was a moment, a long one, that made my blood freeze. A man stood outside the bedroom window, pressed small and still against the panes, his coat soaked, his hair flat against his skull. He was looking at me. I could see the shape of his face, even through rain and reflections. He was the exact size of a grown person. I screamed. My dad heard the scream and woke. I remember him bursting into my room, the way the light from the hallway spilled over his shoulders. He grabbed a flashlight, rushed to the window, and there, just for a second, was a shadow darting away into the yard, vaulting a fence. My father chased him around the side of the house, through wet brambles and trash cans, and lost him somewhere in the night. By morning, there was no trace. The police confirmed what we already suspected. The man had been outside our house, and he had climbed fences in the dark. It hurt when our neighbor acted like nothing had happened. The man next door, a middle-aged guy who kept to himself, told my father not to make a fuss. He said folks in the neighborhood were looking for attention, and these things happen. But when my dad went to him and pointed out the footprints in the garden, mud pressed in the pattern of shoes, marks on the fence, the neighbor shrugged like it was annoying and told them to mind their business. His reaction felt like denial in the face of a knife. Why downplay it? Why act like nothing was wrong? It left a sour taste. After that night, my parents bought new locks and installed a motion light in the backyard. I switched rooms. The mirrored closet that had haunted me made a good case for moving out, but I still felt watched. I caught myself checking the window's reflection in the bathroom, imagining the silhouette of a human figure. Every time I closed my blinds, I imagined a pair of eyes waiting for me to fall asleep. Friends tried to reassure me. "It's probably someone high or drunk," they said. But what terrified me wasn't a drunk stranger. It was that he had worked out a route, found a place at my window, and returned enough times to feel comfortable. The police took the report and said they'd patrol. They documented the evidence, but they also had other calls, bigger crimes, noisier priorities. Their patrols came less often than we hoped. I moved rooms again when I went off to college. Sometimes I think about those nights. The shape at the window, the way the rain made his face into a smear. I wonder if he ever went home, or if he left to watch someone else. I wonder if our neighbor knew more than he said. Those questions don't always get answers. The smell of fear doesn't leave a house the same way that lemon-scented cleaner does. If you're still with me and your skin isn't a permanent chill yet, the third story will strip any remaining comfort you have about what's inside your walls. Story 3. The Secret Squatter. Alberta. We were desperate for affordable housing. The market was brutal. My family found a cheap fixer-upper a little outside town, a house with sagging siding and rotting steps, but with enough room for a crib and a small living room. My parents had plans to patch it up, paint it, and make a home for me and my little sister. The realtor talked about potential and sunlight. We signed papers in December, cold and keen, and spent the holidays lugging furniture in, stacking boxes, finding the faint smell of old cooking in the vents. On the second night we slept there, someone tried to enter. The back door was thrown open. The latch was turned from the outside, like a key had been used. My dad came into my room and woke me. He was breathing in short, shallow pulls, staring at the open doorway as if he could see footprints on the carpet. He locked the door, checked the windows, and called the police. I remember my small sister crying in the bassinet in the next room. The officers came and took notes. They told my parents to install better locks and to be careful. They didn't say that sometimes people hide out in houses. The implication was there, but it wasn't direct. Be cautious, they repeated. After the officers left, the house felt exposed, like a body with its shirt torn open. That night, as my little sister slept in the bassinet, I sat in the hallway with a flashlight. My mother tried to soothe me, to tell me everything would be fine. But I kept hearing laughter, small and muffled, as if someone was listening to us from the walls themselves. At first, I thought it was pipes or the house settling again. But then the baby monitor picked up steps. We had one of those old baby monitors with a tiny speaker that picked up static and the occasional clipping of nearby radio. One night I heard something on it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate. It sounded like someone walking on hardwood right above the monitor, exactly over the baby. We lived on a single level. There were no hidden attics or crawl spaces, at least not that I could find. I told my parents. They laughed and blamed my imagination. My mother stayed up with me that night, the overhead light and coffee keeping her awake. The footsteps stopped. The monitor fell silent. Weeks passed, and the small things piled up. Missing items would turn up in odd places. A box of diapers went missing for a day and showed up behind the washing machine. A speaker was unplugged. Once a small toy was placed beside the front door. The pattern started to resemble habitation rather than random theft. Someone was moving things at night. Someone was making this house their own by small, intimate acts. My dad had had enough. He started checking the house more thoroughly. He bought a crowbar and took off the bookshelf in the living room that hid a wall. It was an old built-in, full of dry rot. He levered the screws out like he was trying to be quiet, but he was clumsy with nervousness. When the board finally came away, we saw the drywall behind it. There was a hollow space. At first we thought it was just insulation. Then we saw the trail of cigarette butts and an empty food wrapper wedged in the gap, a small flashlight, and a switchblade tucked into a corner. There were footprints in the dust. The space was more than a hollow. It had been cleared enough to sit in. The shelf had been modified from the other side to make an opening big enough for someone's shoulders. We pulled further. Behind the bookshelf, a small nook existed where a mattress could fit. A patch of wall had faint scabbed tape marks, and an opening, a small round hole carved at face height. It was aimed directly at the spot where one of the bedroom's beds lay. We tested it. You could see the bed from the hole. You could see the window. The police came when we handed over the finds. They dusted for prints and took the items for evidence. The officers told us the knife and the discarded food wrappers suggested someone had been living in the house for weeks, maybe months. The word squatter was used. They used other words too: voyeur, trespasser. The evidence showed a person had made a home in our walls and watched the rooms from a hole no bigger than the palm of a hand. I remember sitting on the curb that day and feeling hollow. The idea that someone had been watching me sleep, someone in my house inside the drywall, felt like a direct invasion of the most private, vulnerable moments of my life. I thought about how many nights I had slept in that bed, unaware. I thought about my little sister, and the baby monitor picks up steps that no one heard. Who else had kept their eyes on us? We moved out eventually, but my parents stayed. I could see the price of leaving a fixed, affordable mortgage in their faces. They patched the hole, boarded up the hollow, and tried to move on. The property sold to someone else a year later, I heard through a neighbor, but I still worry about them. Were they aware as they slept that someone could be watching? We changed our locks and installed cameras, and we told the police everything we had. The officers documented it, and they did the best they could. They charged an individual months later, according to a follow-up my father received. But the court papers were slow. The case notes I read later had gaps, and a lot labeled as indefinido. The rest was a blur of depositions and statements, detective shifts and caseloads. For weeks after, my parents and I would sit in the living room and pretend everything was normal. The house looked clean, new curtains, a repaired wall, paint perky on the plaster. But the knowledge remained. Someone had carved a room inside our house to watch us. The hole behind the bookshelf was a small domestic terror, an intrusion that had little fanfare and left no dramatic conclusion, just a list of possessions, a few fingerprints, and a nagging assurance that we were not necessarily safe in our own beds. Epilogue. The thing they all share. 3 separate houses, different towns, different ages, different entry points, but the pattern is the same. A new home seems to promise safety, privacy, a reset, and instead becomes a place where that safety is ripped away. Across these accounts, some things stand out. The first was the way people tried to explain what had happened. Imposters, strangers, those with vague motives. The second was the smallness of the clues that proved crucial. A grainy doorbell camera, a smear in a mirror, the sound on a baby monitor. The third was the limitation of authority. Police responded, arrests were made in some cases, but the outcome rarely offered the tidy closure a homeowner wants after being violated. There's another thing these stories share. After the immediate danger is over, there is a longer, quieter fear that does not leave. You stop trusting the night in the same way. You double-check doors, not because you expect to find someone, but because the act of checking feels like control. You might move your bed, change your curtains, or keep a lamp on overnight. You might store doorbell footage on external drives. But those are small defenses against a more troubling fact. The sense that someone could cross the boundary between public life and the private life inside your walls. People often ask me if these stories are rare. The answer is complicated. Crimes like these are not always recorded in newspapers. They are personal, small in the public sense, and they happen behind closed doors. Some get arrests and headlines. Others are quiet tragedies that ripple outward through a family. What binds them is the violation, the idea that walls and locks are not absolute protection. If there's any practical thing to take away, it's less a checklist and more a posture. Be aware, document what happens, date and time, camera footage, police reports, and prioritize your mental safety as much as your physical one. But even these steps don't fix the deeper unease. The houses remain the same, paint, wood, and possibility. The people who live in them remember differently. I still think about those doors and windows. I still replay the footage from the camera in my head sometimes. I still picture the hole behind the bookshelf and the way a small round opening can change what a house is for you. It isn't that the walls are haunted by ghosts. The haunting that remains is human, the thought that someone chose to make the intimate spaces of another person their ground for cruelty or curiosity. That thought doesn't leave when you sell the house or move cities. It's woven into the memory of floors creaking in the middle of the night. If any of these stories struck a chord with you, tell us in the comments. Share your own experience or something you've witnessed. Let's talk about what it felt like to go home and not feel safe there anymore. And if you want to hear more true accounts like these, subscribe and we'll bring you more real-life hauntings. Thank you for listening. And be careful in the quiet spaces of your new places. Sometimes what haunts a home isn't in the attic. It's in the way someone else sees you sleeping.